It was a sweltering afternoon in September 1936 in the small town of Fregenal de la Sierra. A line of women stood in the main square, hands tied behind their backs. Falangist militiamen grabbed handfuls of hair and hacked it off with scissors and razors. One by one the women were forced to swallow large doses of castor oil. Within minutes their bodies betrayed them. They soiled themselves right there in the dust while the crowd laughed and jeered. The militiamen then marched the half-naked, shaven-headed women through the streets as punishment for being wives, sisters, or mothers of Republican fighters. Francisco Franco had already declared himself the supreme leader of the nationalist forces. He held absolute power over life and death across the rebel zone. But everything changed when the long years of dictatorship finally caught up with the aging general. On November 20, 1975, the once iron-fisted Caudillo lay shrunken and pale in a Madrid hospital bed, hooked to machines, his body failing after multiple heart attacks. His final hours spent gasping for air until he slipped away at age 82. Francisco Franco Bahamonde was born on December 4, 1892, in the naval town of Ferrol, Galicia. He grew up in a strict Catholic family, the son of a naval paymaster father who drank heavily and eventually abandoned the household. Young Francisco was small for his age, barely 5 feet 4 inches tall as an adult, and he endured the taunts of bigger boys. That hardship forged a fierce determination. At 14 he entered the infantry academy at Toledo and threw himself into a military career. By his early 20s he was fighting in Morocco, where he earned a reputation for bravery and rose rapidly through the ranks, becoming the youngest major in the Spanish army. What most people don't know is that the same man who later ruled Spain with an iron fist once wrote tender letters home to his pious mother, Pilar, confessing his loneliness in the African campaigns. But the first clear sign of darkness appeared in 1934. Sent to crush the miners' uprising in Asturias, Franco used Moroccan troops and allowed brutal reprisals. The system rewarded his ruthlessness. He learned that fear worked. It kept order. It silenced opposition. And it would soon become the foundation of his entire rule. By July 17, 1936, a group of generals launched a military coup against Spain's elected Republican government. Franco flew from the Canary Islands to Morocco and took command of the elite army of Africa. The coup failed to seize the whole country, plunging Spain into full civil war. Franco moved quickly. On October 1, 1936, in Burgos, he was named Generalissimo and head of state. He unified the rebel factions under his command and set up a government that mixed military discipline with extreme Catholic conservatism. Each step made the next feel inevitable. The nationalists promised to restore order and traditional values. Instead they built a machine of terror. What most people don't know is that Franco personally approved the structure of political repression that targeted not just enemy soldiers but civilians, especially women, who had supported the Republic. By early 1937 his forces controlled most of northern and western Spain. They moved town by town, and with every conquest came the same grim ritual. Local Falangists and civil guards rounded up Republican families. Men were often shot. Women faced a different fate designed to break their spirit and send a public message. The system was deliberate. It was documented. It was encouraged from the top. The horror unfolded in plain sight across hundreds of towns between 1936 and 1940. Republican women were labeled Reds simply for having voted, worked, or had husbands in leftist groups. In the weeks and months after each town fell, thousands suffered public humiliation. Militiamen dragged them into the plaza, shaved their heads bald with clippers or knives, forced them to drink large glasses of castor oil, and then paraded them half-naked through the streets. The oil caused violent diarrhea within minutes. Women stumbled along, clothes stained, bodies exposed, while crowds shouted insults and threw stones. Many were also raped before or after the parade. Historians estimate thousands of women endured this exact ritual during the war and immediate post-war years. In one documented wave alone, entire neighborhoods in Andalusia and Extremadura saw dozens of women per town subjected to the same treatment. Pregnant women were not spared. One survivor later said, "They shaved us, they gave me castor oil. I suffered a lot, because my brother was a socialist, they punished the whole family, it was the worst punishment." According to radio broadcasts by General Queipo de Llano, Franco's key commander in Seville, the troops were told their actions were justified. In one notorious transmission he declared that nationalist soldiers were real men who would teach Republican women a lesson they would never forget. The machinery was efficient. Local priests sometimes watched or even participated. Nuns in post-war prisons continued the practice, shaving heads and administering castor oil to force Catholic repentance. By 1939, more than 14,000 women filled Madrid's Las Ventas prison alone. Over 100 women were sentenced to death by military tribunals and executed, including pregnant mothers. The 13 Roses, 13 young women from the Unified Socialist Youth, ages 18 to 29, were among them. On August 5, 1939, they faced a firing squad in Madrid's Eastern Cemetery after a summary trial. Their crime? Trying to keep their youth group alive underground. 5 of the 13 were still legally minors. The public parade served a clear purpose: to terrorize entire communities. Husbands, fathers, and brothers watched helplessly as their women were broken in the street. The message was simple. Resistance meant your entire family would be destroyed in the most humiliating way possible. By the end of the war in April 1939, the pattern had repeated in town after town. The numbers were staggering. Historians place total civilian deaths under nationalist repression between 150,000 and 200,000, with women making up a significant portion of those publicly shamed even if fewer were executed. The system did not stop when the shooting ended. It simply moved indoors to prisons and reformatories, where the same humiliations continued for years. The seeds of collapse had always been there. Franco's power rested on fear, but Spain was changing. After World War II, the Allies shunned his regime for its Axis sympathies. Economic isolation bit hard. By the 1960s, student protests and worker strikes grew louder. Franco, now in his 70s, suffered from Parkinson's disease and heart problems. He clung to control, naming Prince Juan Carlos as successor in 1969, but the outside world was catching up. In the summer of 1975, massive demonstrations erupted in the Basque Country and Catalonia. Franco, frail and barely able to speak, watched from his residence as police cracked down. When he finally fell seriously ill in October 1975, he reacted with the same stoic denial he had shown for decades. Doctors performed multiple operations, but the Generalissimo refused to fully accept the end. He issued a final message calling for unity and forgiveness, yet the repression he built had already begun to crumble from within. The final moments played out with slow, painful precision in La Paz Hospital in Madrid. It was the morning of November 20, 1975. Franco, 82 years old, lay in a private room surrounded by machines. He wore a plain hospital gown under a military blanket. His once stern face was gaunt, skin paper-thin and yellowish, cheeks sunken from weeks without solid food. Tubes ran into his arms and nose. His breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. Family members and close aides stood nearby, including his wife Carmen and daughter Carmen. At one point he reportedly whispered, "How difficult it is to die." Doctors had kept him alive through 11 operations and constant transfusions, but his heart was failing. At 4:20 a.m., the monitors flatlined. The man who had ordered the public destruction of thousands of women drew his last breath in sterile silence, far from the plazas where his forces once paraded their victims. His body was dressed in full uniform for public viewing, but the face in the coffin looked tiny and broken, nothing like the commanding general who had once terrified a nation. The women he punished never received justice in their lifetimes. Many lived the rest of their days marked by shame, poverty, and silence. Spain's transition to democracy after 1975 chose forgetting over reckoning. What does it say about power that the same country that once forced its own daughters to soil themselves in public squares later buried the memory so completely that generations grew up never hearing their names? The plazas are quiet now. But the question lingers: who decides when the punishment finally ends?